For Poland Daily News, I'm Phil Goss. Making COVID-19 passports available to every EU citizen, increased vaccine production, and the acceleration of vaccination programs in every EU state. These are the measures the EU proposes to be implemented in the near future in order for a gradual abolition of COVID-19 restrictions and a return to normalcy in Europe. The debate on whether the EU should introduce joint COVID-19 passports has been going on for quite some time. On Saturday, President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen gave the first information on whether a political decision is expected to be taken on the matter. We can now realistically say that a political decision on the introduction of the vaccine passports will be taken as early as the end of this month. Many European countries have granted privileges to those who have already been vaccinated, and these will soon be greatly expanded. In Germany, those who have received the vaccine can visit their hairdresser or travel without having to show proof of a negative test result for COVID-19. Similar arrangements have been implemented in Hungary, the United States, Croatia, and Greece. The Polish government has so far not announced which restrictions it will lift off vaccine recipients. Ursula von der Leyen also reported that 200 million vaccine doses have been distributed to EU member states so far. 160 million people have received at least one dose of the vaccine, which means that around 25% of the EU's total population has embarked on the path to full vaccination. The Polish vaccination program is also accelerating. Starting today, people born between the years 2000 and 2003 can now book a vaccination appointment. In total, more than 13 million Poles have received at least their first dose of the vaccine. A holy mass and commemoration ceremony was held in the Chapel of Our Lady of Angels in Laski, near Warsaw, to commemorate the 70th birthday of the former head of the Office for War Veterans and Victims of Political Repression, Janusz Krupski. Mr. Krupski, a famous historian, anti-communist dissident, and co-founder of underground publishing movements, was killed in the Smolensk air disaster in 2010, which also claimed the lives of many of Poland's political and military elite. Janusz Krupski served as the head of the Office for War Veterans and Victims of Repression for the last 4 years of his life. His successor, JOZEF KASPRZYK, stated that Mr. Krupski was one of the heroes who made it possible for Poland to regain its sovereignty in 1989. I had the honor to get to know Mr. Krupski while he was a member of the Pilsudski Association. In my function as his successor at the Office for War Veterans and Victims of Political Repression, I try to fulfill Mr. Krupski's testament. It means that we must guarantee devotion and respect for all veterans of our struggle for independence. I also try to continue his legacy by making sure that we take care of anti-communist opposition activists. Janusz Krupski became an anti-communist opposition activist in the mid-1970s. In 1983, he was kidnapped by agents of the so-called Death Commando of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. The group was led by Captain Grzegorz Piotrowski, who a year later took part in the abduction and murder of Father Jerzy Popiełuszko. The agents took Mr. Krupski out to the forest where they tried to kill him by dousing him with acid. He was repressed, harassed, and eventually kidnapped and taken to the Campinos forest where he was threatened and doused with acid. In the 1990s, Mr. Krupski served as an expert on the Extraordinary Parliamentary Commission to investigate the repercussions that the introduction of martial law by the communist regime in 1981 would have for Polish society in the coming decades. Following the Mass, friends and family of Mr. Krupski paid a visit to his grave. Janusz Krupski passed away at the age of 58. The recent violent clashes between Palestinian protesters and Israeli police outside the Old City of Jerusalem escalated even further on Saturday as tens of thousands of Muslim worshippers prayed at the nearby Al-Aqsa Mosque on Islam's holy night of Laylat al-Qadr. Fears are growing that the violence will lead to increased tensions in the region, with Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan calling Israel a terrorist state in response to its actions in Jerusalem. Palestinian youth threw stones, lit fires, and tore down police barricades in the streets leading to the walled Old City gates as officers on horseback and in riot gear used stun grenades and water cannons to push them back. At least 80 people were injured. It was difficult for many of us to reach Al-Aqsa Mosque to pray on the night of Laylat al-Qadr. We hope everything will stay quiet, especially on this night, but at the end, this is the occupation and anything can happen. Tensions have mounted in the city throughout the Muslim holy month of Ramadan amid growing anger over the potential eviction of Palestinians from Jerusalem homes on land claimed by Jewish settlers. Israel has announced that it is beefing up its security forces in anticipation of further confrontations in Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza after the fierce clashes erupted in the previous night at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Turkish President TAYYIP ERDOGAN has reacted with fury against the violence in Jerusalem, putting the slowly improving relations between Israel and Turkey at risk. The cruel terror state of Israel is mercilessly and unethically attacking Muslims in Jerusalem, whose only goal is to defend their beliefs and their homes of thousands of years. We want the heinous attacks on Al-Aqsa and Muslims in Jerusalem to stop immediately. There have been nearly 300 wounded since it started. We expect all pressure, direct and indirect, to remove Palestinians from their homes to stop. Otherwise, we will do everything we can to ensure the cruel are sentenced to the fate they deserve. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected the pressure coming from parts of the international community calling on Israel to halt construction works in disputed areas of Jerusalem. We also firmly reject the pressures not to build in Jerusalem. To my regret, these pressures have been increasing of late. I say also, to the best of our friends, Jerusalem is Israel's capital, and just as every nation builds in its capital, we also have the right to build it up. The Prime Minister delivered the comments in a televised address ahead of national commemorations of the Israeli capture of East Jerusalem in the Six-Day War of 1967. The death toll from an explosion outside a school in Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, has risen to 58. Doctors are struggling to provide medical care to at least 150 who were injured. Nearly all of the victims were teenage girls from the country's Shia minority. The bombing on Saturday evening shook the city's Shiite Muslim neighborhood of Dashit al-Barchi. The community, a religious minority in Afghanistan, has been targeted in the past by Islamic State militants, a Sunni group. All victims, except for 7 or 8 people, were schoolgirls who had finished school for the day and were going back home. It was a car bomb blast that occurred in front of the school entrance. The school is a joint high school for girls and boys who study in 3 shifts, the second of which is for female students, said Najiba Aryan, spokeswoman for the Ministry of Education. Families of the victims blamed the Afghan government and Western powers for failing to put an end to violence and the ongoing war. Our message to the government is that they should ensure our peace and security. Also, our message to the blind-hearted enemy is that there are so many incidents in Kabul, they should stop the violence and accept peace and stability. Until when will we bury the dead bodies? Our government officials only apologize and show sympathy, which doesn't cure our pain. The violence comes a week after remaining U.S. and NATO troops began exiting Afghanistan with a mission to complete the drawdown by September 11th, which will mark the end of America's longest war. But the foreign troop withdrawal has led to a surge in fighting between Afghan security forces and Taliban insurgents, with both sides trying to retain control over strategic centers.
For Poland Daily News, I'm Phil Goss. Good night.